This is Audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, the definitive account of the most controversial crime of the 20th century, by Lamar Waldron, narrated by Paul Heitch. Preface. 50 years have passed since the murder of President John F. Kennedy. Yet, even with millions of words written about the case, the hidden history of JFK's assassination provides the final pieces to that puzzle for the first time. While several hundred books about President Kennedy's assassination have been published over the past 5 decades, fewer than 24 have seriously dealt with the tidal wave of new information and evidence that has emerged in recent years. Many of those new revelations resulted from the 4.5 million pages of JFK assassination files released throughout the 1990s as a result of the 1992 JFK Act. Even fewer books have presented that information in a clear, concise way, accessible to readers not already steeped in the sometimes arcane and always complex terminology of JFK assassination research. Previous books that provided ample, credible documentation to prove their claims had the additional problem of extreme length. I have personal experience with that, since my first 2 books on JFK's murder, Ultimate Sacrifice and Legacy of Secrecy, were each more than 900 pages. They had a combined total of almost 4,000 endnotes documenting sources, hardly the type of book that most readers can easily digest. New revelations about the case continued to emerge, both from previously released government files and from participants in operations for which the files are still mostly withheld. For example, in 2008, Legacy of Secrecy first revealed and named the FBI's daring undercover Camtex operation, which lasted from 1985 to 1986. On December 15, 1985, that operation obtained Godfather Carlos Marcello's confession that he had ordered JFK's murder. More information about the Camtex operation, including the name of the FBI's undercover informant, Jack Van Lanningham, appeared for the first time in the updated trade paperback of Legacy of Secrecy in 2009. Most of that book's information came from uncensored FBI files I uncovered from officials involved in the operation. However, since that time, I have had dozens of interviews and conversations with Van Lanningham. His observations illuminated many aspects of Marcello's involvement with JFK's murder, as well as with Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby, that weren't completely clear from the files alone. In addition, I uncovered independent corroboration for many of Van Lanningham's observations, originally made when he was Marcello's cellmate and confidant for many months in 1985 and 1986. For the first time, that documented information allows the full story of JFK's assassination to be told in a clear, concise manner, one backed up by the most important earlier discoveries about JFK's murder. The story of Carlos Marcello, Jack Van Lanningham, and JFK's assassination will be told in the upcoming film Legacy of Secrecy, currently being produced by and starring Leonardo DiCaprio, with Robert De Niro slated to play Marcello. However, that film can tell only a small portion of the whole story of JFK's murder. This book provides a much fuller account and provides the supporting documentation backing it up. Credibility is always important in evaluating information about JFK's murder and in deciding which books or revelations to believe. Because I have presented documented information from credible sources, buttressed by independent corroboration, my work has received more mainstream press coverage than most books documenting a conspiracy in JFK's murder. This includes appearing numerous times on CNN and in television documentaries about my work produced by a division of NBC News for the Discovery Channel, and by German public television. Those organizations have been able both to verify the authenticity of the declassified files I showed on those programs and to interview some of my key sources. Other coverage has come from hundreds of newspapers, magazines, radio stations, and television stations in this country and others. Moreover, I aided the staff of the presidentially appointed JFK Assassination Records Review Board in the 1990s, identifying important government files that were not being turned over to the board by U.S. agencies as the law required. Many of the key disclosures in this book came from more than 24 key associates of John and Robert Kennedy, interviewed by me and by my original research collaborator, radio and television commentator Tom Hartman. I then found or helped get declassified files that verified their accounts. In addition, my research was aided by many of the best writers, historians, and former government investigators in the field, many of whom are cited throughout the book, and all of whom are named in this book's extensive acknowledgments. For 25 years, I have been building on their work and advancing the findings of the 5 government investigating committees that came after the Warren Commission. I spent most of that time working full-time on the case, and this book is the first compact culmination of all that research. In response to requests from readers, the print version of this book features an annotated bibliography, making it easy for readers to refer to the books, articles, and documents used as source material. When I began researching the case in 1988, I started with no preconceived conclusions and looked at the evidence against all the individuals and organizations that some considered suspects. Focusing on credible sources, information, and documentation for which there is independent corroboration, and that have stood the test of time, led me to new discoveries and to a cohesive story of what really happened to President Kennedy. The final result of that research is in this book. Since 1966, dozens of carefully researched and well-documented books have thoroughly debunked every aspect of the Warren Commission's conclusion and process, often using the Commission's own evidence as well as information that was withheld from the Commission. The most recent books to do so are 2005's Breach of Trust by noted historian Gerald D. McKnight and A Cruel and Shocking Act, veteran New York Times reporter Philip Sheenan's 2013 book about the Warren Commission. Chapter 2 of The Hidden History of JFK's Assassination debunks some of the Warren Commission's most glaring errors, but the rest of the book focuses primarily on telling the documented story of what led to the murder of John F. Kennedy as simply and concisely as possible. The Hidden History of JFK's Assassination first gives a brief overview of the overwhelming amount of evidence for a conspiracy in JFK's murder. It then describes the Warren Commission's 1964 conclusion about JFK's murder, largely adopted by authors such as Bill O'Reilly, Vincent Bugliosi, Gerald Posner, and Stephen King, and shows how that conclusion is demonstrably wrong. It also presents well-documented information that will show accused assassin Lee Oswald in a whole new light for most readers. After revealing new information about the FBI's Camtex operation and Carlos Marcello, this account begins the chronological story of Marcello's rise to power. It explains why he came to be targeted by John and Robert Kennedy, and how he and his criminal associates became involved in CIA operations against Fidel Castro without the knowledge of the Kennedys. Step by step, this book discloses how JFK was assassinated in a way that forced several top U.S. officials, including Attorney General Robert Kennedy, to withhold key information from the press, the public, and the Warren Commission. They did so to prevent another dangerous U.S. confrontation with the Soviet Union just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. 3 CIA agents, officers, and assets who were involved in JFK's murder, 2 of whom confessed before they died, are also named. The book also reveals new information from Carlos Marcello about Lee Oswald, Jack Ruby, and the mafia hitmen in the Dealey Plaza when JFK was killed. We will also explore the hidden history of the aftermath of JFK's murder, including just how close the truth came to being exposed on several occasions. This history includes secret investigations conducted by the CIA, Naval Intelligence, and Robert Kennedy. The account shows why Robert Kennedy's associates pushed for the creation of the Warren Commission, and why it was limited to essentially endorsing a conclusion that had been publicly proclaimed within hours of JFK's murder. That section includes the tragic story of Abraham Bolden, chosen by JFK to be the first black presidential Secret Service agent, who was framed by the mafia and then arrested when he tried to tell the Warren Commission about two earlier attempts to kill JFK in Tampa and Chicago. The book also identifies the 5 later government investigating committees that had access to far more information than the Warren Commission. Those investigations eventually led Congress to conclude in 1979 that JFK had likely been killed as the result of a conspiracy in which Carlos Marcello had the motive, means, and opportunity. The book reveals what happened after Marcello made his JFK confession, unveiling details about JFK's assassination in words recorded on undercover FBI audio tape. It shows why the 1992 JFK Act, unanimously passed by Congress, requires the Bureau to release those tapes and transcripts, and why the CIA and Naval Intelligence should release their remaining files related to JFK's assassination. According to NBC News, those agencies have still not released millions of pages of records involving JFK's assassination. However, the hidden history of JFK's assassination explains what is in the unreleased files, since much of the story came directly from Kennedy associates and others who experienced crucial events firsthand. Along the way, the book also debunks some of the more pervasive myths about JFK's murder that continue to surface on the internet, years after they were proven false. This book identifies those who were involved in JFK's assassination, as well as those whose involvement, or lack of it, is less clear and may be determined only when the CIA, FBI, and Naval Intelligence release the rest of their JFK assassination files. Releasing all the JFK assassination files is important because U.S.-Cuba relations have been essentially frozen since the time of JFK's assassination. In part, that's because high U.S. officials such as President Lyndon Johnson and CIA Director John McCone, and those involved in Cuban operations in 1963 who later became high officials, such as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State Alexander Haig, believed fragmentary CIA reports that Fidel Castro was somehow behind JFK's assassination. However, historians and researchers have shown that all the Castro-killed JFK CIA reports were either debunked and/or can be traced back to the mob bosses and their CIA associates who later confessed their roles in JFK's murder. Helping to expose that, and other parts of the hidden history of JFK's murder, readers of this book can help to remove one of the last remaining obstacles to finally ending America's 52-year-long Cold War with Cuba.